In every city, there are stories that never made the papers. Not because they weren't important, but because they were inconvenient. They live in forgotten files, in half-finished investigations, in questions no one wanted answered. This isn't where justice always wins. This is where the echoes remain. This is Reverberating Noir. There is a photograph, 1886. Belle Starr sits on a horse named Venus, side saddle, in a black riding habit, a pistol on her hip, a wide-brimmed hat tilted at an angle that suggests she chose it. She is looking directly at the camera, not performing. Looking.
The distinction matters. Performance is for an audience. What she's doing in that photograph is something closer to documentation. She is deciding what the record will contain.
Her name at birth was Myra Maybelle Shirley, Carthage, Missouri, 1848. What records suggest is that her father ran a hotel and an inn and understood that a daughter who could read Latin and play piano was an asset of a particular kind. She was educated past what the county expected of her. That gap between what she was given and what the world would allow her to do with it, that gap is where this story lives.
Latin and piano. Those are not practical skills for a girl in Carthage, Missouri in 1848. They are signals. Her father was telling her something about her own value before the world had a chance to tell her something different. The question is whether that was a gift or a complication. I think it was both. I think she knew it was both.
The Civil War came through Missouri and left nothing where it had been. Everything moved. Nothing landed where it had been. The Shirley family were Southern sympathizers in a border state, which meant they were never entirely safe and never entirely committed to leaving. Her brother Bud rode with Quantrill's guerrillas. 1864, Bud Shirley was killed. He was 20 years old. Myra Maybelle was 15. The family left Missouri shortly after.
She was 15 when she learned that the world would take the people closest to her and offer no accounting for it. That is a specific education. It does not appear on any curriculum, but it shapes every decision that follows.
They went to Texas, Zion, outside Dallas. Her father built another inn. She learned to ride as if the horse were an extension of her own decision-making. That is not a small thing. In that landscape, at that moment, mobility was not convenience. Mobility was argument.
And argument, in that part of Texas, in that decade, was not abstract. It was physical. A woman who could ride well could leave a room that had no door. That changes the mathematics of every situation she enters.
The men she chose or who chose her were not incidental. They were structural. Jim Reed, Cole Younger, by rumour and by legend, and by the insistence of dime novelists who needed the geometry to be romantic. Sam Starr, whose name she would take and keep past his death. Each of these men was wanted for something. She was wanted for association. The law understands proximity as guilt. It has always understood that.
Wanted for association. It's worth sitting with that phrase. Association is not an act. It is a location. It is a choice about who you stand near. The law treating location as evidence tells you something about what the law was actually measuring. It was not measuring conduct. It was measuring alignment.
Jim Reed, she married in 1866. He was already in trouble with the law before the ink was dry. They had 2 children, a daughter, Rosie Lee, who would be called Pearl, a son, James Edwin, called Ed. Reed was killed by a lawman in 1874. Belle was 25. She did not identify his body.
Wait, she did not identify his body.
The reason she gave was that identification would have cost the man who killed him the reward money. Whether that was loyalty or pragmatism or something that does not have a clean name, she did not say.
She was 25 with 2 children, and she made a calculation at the moment of maximum grief. Or maximum clarity. Those are not always different things. What I find precise about that choice is that it required her to say nothing. To be absent from the official record at a moment when the record was being written, she understood that silence is also a position.
Sam Starr was Cherokee. They married in 1880 in Indian Territory in what is now eastern Oklahoma. The land had its own legal architecture, tribal jurisdiction, federal oversight, a jurisdictional seam that outlaws understood better than most lawyers did. Belle understood it too.
The jurisdictional seam is not a metaphor. It is a literal line on a map where one set of rules ends and another begins. She chose to build her life precisely there. Not near it, on it. That requires a very detailed understanding of how authority actually functions. Not how it presents itself, how it actually functions.
Their home was called Younger's Bend. She named it. She named it after a man she may or may not have loved, which tells you something about how she handled the distance between myth and fact. She closed it, on her own terms.
But here is what the record does not explain. Why that name? If the connection to Cole Younger was legend and the evidence suggests it was then naming her home after him was not sentiment. It was architecture. She was building the legend into the walls of the place where she actually lived. She was making the myth load-bearing.
Younger's Bend sat on the South Canadian River. 3 sides of it were water. One side was a single road in. That is not a coincidence. That is a floor plan.
A floor plan with the river doing most of the work. She let the landscape be the lock. She only needed to watch the door.
Isaac Parker held federal court in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He had jurisdiction over Indian Territory, 74,000 square miles of it, and he exercised that jurisdiction with a consistency that his supporters called justice and his critics called something else. He hanged 86 men over 21 years. He was called the hanging judge. He called himself a servant of the law. Both things can be true simultaneously and still not resolve.
74,000 square miles. 1 court, 1 judge. The ratio of territory to oversight is itself a kind of argument. When you give one man jurisdiction over that much space, you are not describing a justice system, you are describing a pressure point.
Belle Starr stood in Parker's courtroom in 1883. The charge was horse theft. She and Sam were convicted. She served 9 months at the House of Correction in Detroit.
9 months in Detroit. 1,000 miles from the South Canadian River, from the one road in, from every piece of geography she had spent years learning to read. That distance was part of the sentence. Whether the court understood that or not.
She was the first woman convicted of a major crime in Parker's court. The newspapers noted this. They noted it the way newspapers note things that confirm what they already believe. She had become, by then, a character in a story that other people were writing. She understood this. The photograph on Venus that was taken 3 years later. She knew what she was doing.
The first woman convicted of a major crime in Parker's court. That framing tells you what the newspapers needed her to be. An exception, a category violation. What it does not tell you is whether the conviction was proportionate, or whether the charge was the actual concern, or whether she was standing in that courtroom because of what she had done, or because of where she had chosen to stand. Those are different questions. The newspapers did not ask them.
There is a letter she wrote from Detroit to her daughter Pearl. She describes the cold. She describes the schedule. She asks about the horses. It is the letter of a woman who is managing the distance between where she is and where she needs to be. It is not the letter of a woman who has been broken.
The detail everyone skips past is this. She asks about the horses. Not the land, not the legal situation, the horses. Because the horses were how she moved through the world. They were the instrument of every freedom she had built for herself. Asking about them from a cell in Detroit is not small talk. It is a woman checking whether her means of escape still exist.
That distinction matters. It matters because the story that was being written about her required her to be broken, or dangerous, or both. She was neither. She was precise.
Precise! Yes! Though I wonder if that word does all the work you want it to. Precision implies control, and she had control over a great deal, but not over the narrative. Not over what the newspapers printed, not over what Parker's court made of her. She was precise within a frame she did not build. That is a different kind of precision, a harder one.
Sam Starr was killed in December of 1886. A dance, a confrontation with a lawman named Frank West. They shot each other. Belle was 38. She had now outlived 2 husbands. She remained at Younger's Bend. She did not leave.
Her legal claim to that land ended when Sam died. She knew that. She stayed.
The land was Cherokee land, and her right to it had been through Sam, and Sam was gone, and she stayed anyway. That required a particular kind of nerve that does not have a romantic name. It is just nerve.
What she was asserting, by staying, was not a legal argument. It was a prior one. She was asserting that her presence on that land was its own form of title. That occupation, over time, with full knowledge of the risk, constitutes a claim the paperwork had not caught up to. She may have been wrong about that legally. She does not appear to have been wrong about it practically. She stayed for 2 more years.
She took up with a man named Bill July, also called Jim July Starr, who was younger than her by more than a decade. He was Cherokee. She seems to have been drawn, consistently, to men who existed in the jurisdictional seam men, for whom the law was a geography to be navigated, rather than a ceiling to live under.
The pattern across her relationships is consistent enough that I don't think it was accidental. She chose men who moved through the same legal landscape she did. Men who understood that the map and the territory were not the same thing. Whether that was love or strategy or simply the only kind of partnership available to a woman living where she lived and how she lived, I'm not sure the distinction would have meant much to her. She was not sentimental about categories.
Whether she loved them or needed them, or found in them a reflection of something she recognized, the record does not say. The record rarely says the things that would actually explain anything.
But here is what no one accounts for. She kept choosing. After Reed was killed, after Sam was killed, she did not retreat into the kind of widowhood the century expected of her. She chose again. That repetition is not recklessness. It is insistence.
In the last months of her life, she was involved in a dispute with a tenant named Edgar Watson. He had come to Younger's Bend from Florida. There were rumours, and they were rumours. The record is thin here, and I want to be precise about that rumours that he was wanted for murder in Florida. She allegedly threatened to expose him. He allegedly denied everything. What is not alleged is what happened next. What happened next is fact. February the 3rd, 1889.
She built a home with one road in. She understood the value of controlling access. And then she let someone in who may have had every reason to want her silent. I'm not drawing a conclusion. I'm noting the geometry. The geometry is uncomfortable enough on its own.
She was riding home. The road with one way in. She was shot from ambush. She was 40 years old. She died the day before her 41st birthday. No one was ever convicted.
No one was ever convicted.
Edgar Watson was arrested. Released. The witness against him was her son Ed, and Ed's testimony was ruled inadmissible. A son could not testify against a man accused of killing his mother. That is not a loophole. That is the law behaving exactly as it was designed to behave. The design is the point.
The law that she had spent her entire adult life reading, navigating, and occasionally outmaneuvering that law made it impossible for the one person with direct knowledge to speak. Not because the system failed, because it worked. It is worth being precise about that. Failure and function can produce identical outcomes. Only one of them requires you to ask harder questions.
The dime novels had already made her. Richard Fox published a biography the year she died, 1889, that was largely invention. It gave her a romance with Cole Younger that the evidence does not support. It gave her a mythology that the evidence could not contain. She became the Bandit Queen. She became a type.
The biography was published the same year she died. She did not have the opportunity to correct it. That timing is, I want to be careful here, that timing is convenient for the biography. A woman who had demonstrated repeatedly that she understood exactly how her image was being constructed was no longer available to participate in the construction. What replaced her was a version of her that required no negotiation. That is a particular kind of erasure. It presents itself as celebration.
Types are easier to manage than people. They require less from you.
They require nothing from you. That is the appeal.
Her daughter Pearl buried her at Younger's Bend. She carved the headstone herself. She included a horse. She included a bell. She wrote, "Shed not for her the bitter tear, nor give the heart to vain regret. 'Tis but the casket that lies here, the gem that filled it sparkles yet." Pearl was 20 years old. She had been left, repeatedly, by a mother who was always managing the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. She carved the stone anyway. That is also a kind of precision.
Pearl chose a poem about what survives, about the thing that cannot be put in the ground. She was 20 years old and she had been largely raised by other people, and she had watched her mother be turned into a character before the body was cold. And she put a horse on the stone, and a bell, not a gun, not a wanted poster, a horse and a bell. Pearl knew something about her mother that the dime novels did not. She put it in the stone because stone is harder to rewrite than paper.
Go back to the photograph. 1886. 3 years before she died. She is on Venus. She is looking at the camera. The pistol is on her hip. The hat is tilted at the angle she chose. She knows the photograph will outlast her. She knows what a photograph does. It fixes a person in a single geometry and calls it truth. She is not performing for it. She is negotiating with it. There is a difference. She knew the difference. That is what the photograph holds.
She was negotiating with every surface that tried to fix her. The law, the newspapers, the camera. She understood that the record is not neutral, that whoever controls the frame controls the meaning. She spent 40 years trying to hold the frame herself. And then one morning on the road with one way in, she couldn't. What we're left with is the photograph, her terms, her geometry, her eyes, looking directly at whatever comes next.
If you've stayed with us through this, through the jurisdictional seams and the one road in and the stone that Pearl carved by hand, that is exactly why Reverberating Noir exists. Subscribe wherever you listen. We'll be here.
She was negotiating with every surface that tried to fix her. The law, the newspapers, the camera. She understood that the record is not neutral, that whoever controls the frame controls the meaning. She spent 40 years trying to hold the frame herself. And then one morning on the road with one way in, she couldn't. What we're left with is the photograph, her terms, her geometry, her eyes, looking directly at whatever comes next.
And so the file closes. But the case doesn't. Not for the families. Not for the witnesses who still pause before answering questions. Not for a city that remembers, even when it pretends not to. The evidence sits somewhere in a box. The photographs fade. The names are spoken less often.
And as long as the questions are still unanswered, the case isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to look again.
And here, it keeps reverberating.